A father watched his son's face change during a timeout, and something inside him broke open right there on the court. He didn't call anyone, didn't text, didn't wait. He just walked across that floor and got in someone's face. That 8-second confrontation inside Crypto.com Arena on March 6, 2025, became one of the most viral moments in sports media history. It wasn't about basketball. It was about a son, a legacy, and a line that had finally been crossed. Everything you're about to hear was building for years before that moment even happened. It started with a declaration that a father made to the entire world back in 2018, and he never walked it back. He said publicly that if the league wanted him, they had to draft his son. Wherever his son went, he was going too. By 2023, he doubled down and told the world his son was better than players he'd been watching on League Pass. Those words created a frame around a young man before he had ever played a single NBA minute. Every scout, every analyst, every broadcaster had to evaluate that kid through the lens his father had already built for him. The son survived a cardiac arrest in the summer of 2023 and came back to declare for the draft with limited college production. The Lakers took him 55th overall in June 2024, and the father had engineered exactly what he said he would engineer. Opening night, October 22, 2024, a father and son shared an NBA court simultaneously for the first time in league history. The Griffey family flew in. The moment was real. The cameras were everywhere, and the world watched it happen. But reality has a way of showing up on the stat sheet regardless of how beautiful the moment looks in real time. By late January 2025, the son had appeared in 13 games, played 44 total minutes, and scored exactly 4 points. He was shooting 1 for 16 from the field, 0 for 7 from 3, and averaging 0.3 points per game. In the G League, he was producing, but in an NBA uniform, the gap between where he was placed and what he was ready for was impossible to ignore. On January 28th, the Lakers lost to Philadelphia, and the son played a season-high 15 minutes, going 0 for 5 with 3 turnovers. He was isolated defensively against one of the best guards in the league, and the scoreboard didn't lie about how that went. The next morning, a broadcaster went on national television and delivered the monologue that set everything in motion. He opened with context, cited the coach's own admission that maybe the moment had been too much too soon, and then directed his message at the father. He said, "Stop this." 2 words, aimed not at the son, but at the father, who had built the situation the son was now drowning in. He brought up a boxing analogy about a legendary fighter who, out of love, put his own son in the ring too early against a man who almost destroyed him. He framed the whole thing as a plea from someone who understood greatness, but disagreed with how that greatness was being used on a child. That same day, he posted an extended version online, went further, named names, and expressed frustration that his concern was being read as an attack. People close to the father had texted him, calling it a questioning of parenting, and that made his position harden even more. He maintained the entire time that he was critiquing a basketball decision made in public, on a public platform by a public figure. But the father heard something different. He heard a verdict, not a commentary, and that distinction would define everything that followed. 5 weeks later, during a third-quarter timeout, the father walked out of the huddle and moved directly toward the courtside seat.
Multiple fans had their phones up, and the clip was viral within hours of the final buzzer sounding. By the next morning, every major sports outlet in the country had the footage, and the broadcaster woke up to calls from everywhere. The broadcaster chose not to respond in the moment. He was seated with major figures on a nationally televised court, and he understood the optics. He let it happen. He sat still, and he waited, because he knew that whatever he did next would become the entire story. The morning after, on March 7th, he sat down on camera, and his opening statement was genuinely measured and full of empathy. He said that wasn't a basketball player confronting him. That was a parent. That was a father. And he meant it in that moment. He said openly that if he had been in that position himself, he couldn't say definitively that he would have done anything different. He told the audience what he would have said privately, that his words were directed at the father's decisions, never at the son. He kept the door open, he expressed zero animosity, and for about 24 hours the whole situation had a chance to cool down. Then he noticed something that shifted everything. The father had access to his number through multiple channels and chose the courtside cameras instead. That detail started eating at him because a private resolution had been available and a public performance had been chosen deliberately. When the father appeared on a hot mic days later, still framing it as personal and parental, the broadcaster had his answer about what was really happening. By around March 11th, the empathy had curdled into something harder, and he called the move weak and called the whole thing a statement, not a confrontation. He argued publicly that walking up to someone in front of live cameras with no warning is not how a man handles genuine grievances privately. He said the goal was never resolution. The goal was the clip, the moment, the image of a father defending his son on national television. He went back to the root of everything he had been saying since January, and he was precise, and he didn't flinch once. He said the father had gone on television himself and told the world his son was better than current NBA players before the draft ever happened. He said the father had publicly tied his own continued career to wherever his son landed, guaranteeing maximum media pressure would follow the son everywhere. He said the scrutiny that came down on the son was not something that happened to the family. It was the direct consequence of decisions the father made. Every take, every segment, every critique had a clear target, and that target was the father's choices, not a 20-year-old kid trying to make a roster. 3 weeks after the confrontation, the father went on a major sports show and spoke for over an hour, addressing the broadcaster directly on ESPN. He said he had never had a problem with basketball criticism, that it was part of the game, that players get evaluated and that was the job. But then he drew his line and said when it becomes personal, it becomes his job to protect his household and protect the people around him. The broadcaster watched that interview and then delivered one of the sharpest monologues of his entire broadcasting career in response. He said the father had gone on national television and lied about what had actually been said on January 29th, and he was prepared to prove it. He pulled out the receipts, the tweet, the public statements, the pre-draft declarations, and laid them out one by one on air. He asked out loud why no one in that long interview had pushed back and asked about the father calling his son better than NBA players before the draft. He argued the father was attempting to rewrite the public record by casting the broadcaster as someone who attacked a kid rather than someone who critiqued a father's decisions. Then he brought in something that had been running underneath this entire story the whole time, the greatest of all time debate. He said he had never ranked the father as the greatest basketball player ever, had always placed someone else above him, and wondered aloud if that was the real wound.
He also pointed out that the day of the courtside confrontation was the same day his new contract announcement went public. He suggested the father knew the cameras were fixed, knew the moment would be captured, and timed it deliberately because of that. A few days later, the father posted an old video of the broadcaster boxing with laughing emojis, and the broadcaster called it petty but read it as a signal. The signal was clear. The father wasn't putting this down, wasn't walking away, and wasn't interested in letting it fade into the news cycle. By October 2025, on a separate podcast, the broadcaster said out loud that he simply didn't like the man, not even a little bit. The public split exactly the way you'd expect when something like this plays out in real time across every platform at once. People who saw a father protecting his child from media cruelty landed on the father's side and felt the anger in those 8 seconds. People who believed broadcasters should be able to analyze athletic performance without walking on eggshells sided with the broadcaster completely. The viral clip itself, the father in his jersey leaning down, scowling as he walked back toward the huddle, became one of the most shared sports images of the year. And while all of this was burning across the internet, the actual subject of all of it was still on a roster, still developing, still playing. On March 20th, 2025, the Suns scored a career-high 17 points against Milwaukee and looked, for the first time, like someone who genuinely belonged. The broadcaster went on air the next day and said he might have been wrong and that he was genuinely impressed by what he saw. The game moved forward the way the game always does. It doesn't wait for the arguments off the court to catch up with what happens on it. But the argument itself never closed. The confrontation was 8 seconds long, and the conversation it opened has not ended. A father's love, a son's career,
A broadcaster's critique and 8 seconds on a hardwood floor changed the entire landscape of sports media in 2025.